think. Okay, I think they can hear us.
All right.
All right, chat. Can you hear us? I know you can hear the music. I hope you guys can hear us talking. We're doing our pre-show sound check with you guys. Let us know how we're coming through. How are
Dun
you
dun
doing so far?
dun. Doing pretty good. I'm actually quite honored and excited to be here. This is going to be fun. Even if I have no clue what I'm talking about, it's still going to be fun.
You know what? That's one of the joys of doing a show like this is the humility. So yeah, it looks like we're coming through well here. Um, we're getting into a good habit on this side of things. I'm getting better with those transitions too, so I'm happy about that. And all right, good. Okay, Kitty Bear says, "Speak up, I can't hear you." Okay, you're having fun there, Kitty Bear. Thank you for that. All right, without further ado, let's let's get this show started. I don't have an audio. I should get an audio cue for this. People out there, if you're listening on the replay or live in the chat and you have a good idea for a cool royalty-free audio cue, please send them my way. I'd like to preface this with something fun, kind of like old school radio show type thing. Whatever music you think would be cool, something brief to go in there because we're going to get into the show intro here, which is this. Welcome, everyone, to Scripts on Saturdays, the only screenplay review show on the interwebs discussing scripts both professional and amateur, circulating around Hollywood, giving you, the TV and movie-going audience, a behind-the-scenes and inside track on what writers are pushing and what producers are buying. I am your host, the Script Doctor, and joining me this week is Adega. So happy to have you here, man. How are you today?
I am ready to have a blast. No, this is going to be fun. And if you need free music or what have you, just talk to me. I'll get with my buddy Alan at co.ag. He's all his stuff's free. We can talk and see if he's got anything that you may be interested in.
Oh, that'd be great. Yes, totally. More things to increase the production value, the better.
There you go. There you go.
All right. So this week we read a screenplay from the 2021 Blacklist. So it's a little bit older, but it's still circulating around. It's called Divorce Party. It's written by Rebecca
Yes.
Webb, and it placed number 3 on the 2021 Blacklist with 25 votes. Do you want to go ahead and read the logline for our audience, please?
All right, here we go. Patricia Ford feels pretty good about trading her South Boston roots for a perfect life on New York's Upper East Side until everything falls to shit and her ruckus girlfriends throw her a divorce party at the home she's about to lose. As the night goes from wild to totally insane, Patricia takes back control of her life.
Yeah, I was not thrilled by this logline because it reads more like a synopsis.
Yes,
You,
yes,
you did a great job reading that. The
lots of
synopsis
practice.
that I whipped up is basically this. After a tragic discovery of her husband being with a younger woman, Patricia returns to her roots and estranged best friend Amy to drown her grief in booze. However, Amy thinks such a reaction to a failed marriage isn't productive and convinces Patricia to throw a divorce party in her home before she is kicked out and on her own. But can such a party really address the conflicts swirling in Patricia's mind?
Much better.
Thank you. So, what were your initial thoughts, Adega, when you read this script?
Well, at the very beginning, when I started going through it, yeah, I've been to Boston and a couple of times, and I've heard the people talk. And at the beginning, you get there's lots of flashbacks and things. We'll probably get into that.
Mm-hmm.
But picking up whether it's a Boston accent or someone trying to write something from the 40s, it threw me a little bit. Um, so that kind of, my mind always wants to figure out the details of, how accurate is this?
Mm-hmm.
And then in 88 was one of the mentions where they were dressed like Madonna wannabes, and I think that fad had already come and gone. So I was getting a hypercritical at the time, at when I was going through the very beginning, and then I kind of got the rhythm of it after seeing the time jumps and where it was going. Didn't mean I felt any better about that, but I started to understand the writer a little bit, and then we ran into some other difficulties later on. But I see where she was coming from and what she was trying to make, and I would say mildly entertained,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I would say the Boston accent that she writes, it flows well, but I feel like it's like a Hollywood approach to a Boston accent as opposed to
Yes.
possibly an authentic one.
Yes.
Um, but I mean, the thing is that as soon as I was reading it, I'm like, I know exactly where she's coming from here. She is trying to do the typical, the very thick Boston accent, not playing around with like what Scorsese did with The Departed, but going just kind of like full balls to the walls type of, we're gonna
Right.
have fun with this. And I'm like, okay, I get that. They're framing this as to be a comedy. Um, I understand where they're coming from there, but I was actually quite impressed with how well it flows, how well it read.
Yes.
It wasn't janky, it wasn't jarring. Um, I think some of the character voices, at least in that initial flashback, were pretty solid because this script opens up kind of after the divorce party has happened. This is told
Right.
in a narrative that you'd probably see in something like an Ocean's 11 or a Hangover or even a Usual Suspects, because these are three comps that you could probably say fits with this movie, without getting into the twist at the end, which I thought was an okay twist, but we'll wait to, because we're not going to talk about the twist to preserve the integrity of the script, but it will be
Yeah, because
something we
this is
have
a
to orbit
significant
around.
one.
Yeah, we have to orbit around it a little bit. But I actually really enjoyed how on the first few pages they established the setting and how trashed it was, because it actually painted a really strong picture in my mind. I understood that they were in the Hamptons, that was a very elite looking house,
Yep.
um, how it was trashed, and I liked kind of how it set up one thing and then threw you for a loop of what it actually was. And we can actually spoil this a little bit. We're set up with like a similar opening in regards to like Sunset Boulevard, where there's a body in the pool floating there, but there's an arrow protruding out of the back of its head. And you later learn it's not really a human body; it's just an inflatable doll
Right. Right.
that the women were taking pot shots at with a bow and arrow. So I mean, I liked some of those gimmicks that the writer was injecting here. But what were your thoughts on the description? How well was the writer able to establish a setting from your perspective?
Well, there I have good and bad. One, I'm with you. It was a good, you understood what she was trying to put. But I have a question for you, which goes along with my thoughts about the script is how often do these scripts use common knowledge phrases or comparisons to describe something? Because there was a lot of product placement.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of this person is just like this actress, or this person is just like imagine this actress. And to me, it seemed a weakness in it didn't allow whoever was going to direct it to have enough play because they're being told this is what I want as opposed to this is the setting. So is that common in scripts?
Yes, it is common because what you're trying to do is you're not so much trying to talk to the director, you're trying to talk to the producer.
Okay.
And you're conveying to the producer and the readers and all their assistants, this is the type of imagery that I am associating with these characters. I want you to be able to make the leap into visualizing this script as a movie in your head as you're reading it. So I'm going to reference this, they have this type of actor look, or these two girls are modeling a style similar to Madonna in 87 type of thing.
Gotcha.
That's what they're trying to do here because they want to, as quickly and as effectively as possible, implant a picture in your mind that you're not going to lose as you're reading the script and as it's going. And they just do this for ease because, again, a lot of common requirements of certain producers when they're being pitched is they say, explain it to me like I'm four. And I think that's more insulting to them than it is to you having to do that, because it's like, if you can't process language more sophisticated than a 4-year-old, why are you even sitting there?
Gotcha.
But
Okay. Well, in that sense, I would say that she did a really good job
yeah.
because you could see the scene. You
Mhm.
could see exactly what she was intending. Even though, for me, I do my own writing, but not script, so it was really foreign, and that makes a lot of sense what you said.
Yeah, it's part of the shorthand techniques that a lot of screenwriters are using recently, where they're trying to capture, they have their own character voice, and they're thinking, well, what actor that I know of now that 90% of the time you probably can't get, but would be ideal for this. Then you throw it in there. And then, maybe the script gets produced or, picked up and the director gets involved and they're like, okay, I see what actor they're coming from for here, but I probably have a better actor in mind that can actually nail this role better than that actor's suggestion. And that's always a possibility. And that's always a type of a compromise that you have to be as a writer, because when you sell a script or it's going into production with a development deal, you don't really get a whole lot of control anymore. Like it's out of your hands. Like you can just, like an architect can design a building, but they don't decide what color it's going to be at the end of the day, so to speak, or how it's furnished exactly. So sometimes, you have to compromise a little bit in that regard. But I mean, when it came to characters, some of the character descriptions were really strong. Some of them were kind of weak, but I was really bothered by the fact that there was a lot of women introduced in this. Not. I mean, this is all predominantly women-led script, which is fine, but it's just like we had a lot of characters, and it was almost hard to keep track of all of them beside the main two, which would be Patricia, who we mentioned in the log line, and then Amy, which is her best friend from childhood. They were the ones that you had to keep focus on, but then you've got like others that
Kwan and Silver,
you have the two, Julie, Kwan, and Silver, and then you had Blair, Blair and Karen. And it's like,
and Jacqueline.
And Jacqueline, yeah. And then you had the kids on top of that. So you had Eloise and Grant and Sterling Jr. And I'm like, these are a lot of characters to juggle. And then there's more characters that come later on. But it's like, that's a lot of stuff to juggle. And on top of that, you're not dedicating enough screen time to the main characters and their story and their plight. And it's got an interesting framing device, which I actually don't mind in this case here, because of the actual genre that this movie really is in. Like, it's kind of being pitched as a comedy, but it's something else that I don't want to spoil here for the audience. I actually want to encourage you guys to go out and find the script, read the script on your own, or if you just want to, email me. I can facilitate that for you without any issues. You also get sneak peeks when you're a patron, so just plugging that over here as well. But aside from that, it's like, there's some really delicate balancing that has to be done here, and I don't think it was fully nailed. I think some characters could have been combined into one, so that how do I put it? So that you get a bit more simplicity with the script. And this was a very short script. It was only 105 pages, which is a good brisk read for a comedy. It's the shortest script we've had on this show so far, which I appreciated. And
but it did seem to have a little bit more than, say, like the Madden. I don't know why, but Madden just did it flowed pretty quick. This one kind of did too. So I imagine some of this, because she puts a lot of visuals into it. Like at the very beginning, where you're seeing the house, you're seeing the remnants of the party, you see inside the house, you can see the torn up this, the scattered that, the broken this, and I imagine having a film adaptation, that could take up some time just visually instead of reading through it for someone to eat up 10, 15 minutes just on the opening scene.
Yeah. But I mean, the other part too is it's very effective descriptions. I really like it. I can't deny that, much like with the writer who did Madden, this writer here, she does have a voice that's strong and a way of pacing things. Now, one thing that kind of threw me off, I wasn't expecting as much, but again, I should have assumed as much, because this is a trait that women do, is there's lots of pop song references peppered throughout the script.
Yeah, that was one of the things, the pop songs, the product placements. I don't know how, well, for me, I would think that would make it more difficult for, and you know the business, I don't, but I would think it would make it more difficult when you're just throwing out names like Subway and brand name drinks and this and that and the other, how difficult that would be to either include or exclude. I know they're fishing for sponsorships to add to the budget of the film, but, and then all the music references, how many people are going to get those,
Well, I mean, it's one of 3 studios, because if it goes to Warner Brothers, I think they'd have the rights to most of them, so it wouldn't be much of an issue.
Right. Well, that's true.
The other part too is things like that, they're always subject to change, but they're really just, when you take a look at a script like this, it's kind of a placeholder. Do we have to have Subway? No, we could have any sandwich shop if we have to, or we could just make up our own sandwich shop. Doesn't matter.
No, okay.
But if they can reach out and get a sponsorship deal or some sort of like pre-sales, promote cross promotion or anything like that, I mean, there's no harm in trying, especially on the studio side of things, especially if they think they've got a hit on their hands and they got a good cast and they're like, okay, we have Subway sandwiches mentioned in this movie. Let's reach out to Subway, see if they're interested in actually doing an ad placement. And if not, well, we'll just go to a competitor, and say, to heck with them. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. One of the things I like to promote to other writers that reach out for my house, for my consults, is that if you're going to use a product placement or you're going to do something that might be risky or expensive, just do it, because you can always change it later. It costs nothing, especially if a studio exec says, well, that's a great idea, but I don't think we can afford it. We might have to rewrite it or cut it out. At least that's a constructive note where it's like they're saying, we want this, but we have this stipulation that has to be addressed because of our own budget limitations or because of our own pitch limitations. There's nothing wrong with that. At least you showed them that you can actually deliver on that level of thing, because you never know. Maybe you come up back to them with another film that's maybe has a higher budget, but they understand that you can come up with those ideas, and they can understand that you can that they have the money to do it, and they're like, well, okay, we can rely on you. We know that you can come up with the ideas. We know that you can modify them as needed, so you're a bit more reliable of a candidate for a new project, as opposed to another person brand new who probably fought back and said, no, you can't cut out this one special effects scene or this one pivotal moment between characters for budget purposes. It's dependent on the story. That's not that you don't really want to be working with those types of writers. So that's the context that I would bring up in this case here. And this writer kind of just knocked it out of the park. She provided a lot of options,
Right.
and a lot of things there's like a certain alcohol, like summertime alcohol, I think it was called, that they kept on dropping.
Whitechapel or something like that. White
Something like
Church.
that.
I can't remember.
Something like that. It was a pink drink, essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
But either way, at first I thought it was a weakness, but the way you explain it and learning more of the business, which I think is a fabulous part of your show, is that actually makes the writer Rebecca. It's a strength instead of something that she needed to work on. So that's a good thing to know.
yeah, well, I'm happy to volunteer that. And if you guys are out in the chat, have questions about this, especially if you've read the script, send them in via super chat, because I can actually read those a lot easier than the normal one that's flinging by, and we'll address those towards the end of the show. But one thing I kind of want to talk about a little bit is the context of how our main character Patricia got into the situation of having a divorce party. And we get this interesting setup where she's with her socialite friends, they're UES friends, and I don't even think I even know what the UES stands for, but like Upper East Side, I'm guessing. And they're all talking about how in their world, if a divorce occurs, the female is pretty much expelled from the group, and the hot new model comes in and takes her place because it's a man's domain. And this is done through subtext. It's not as blatant with regards to it being a man's domain. They're just talking about the social circle from the female perspective.
Right.
And I'm like, that's done kind of tactfully, especially in 2021 where things were a little bit more volatile in that nature. I'm like, that's some good discipline there. And I understood the social construct because it presents certain stakes. And then when we get to the point where Patricia, who wants to surprise her husband, who's on a business trip further upstate, I guess, and finds out that he is not actually with a client. He is being serviced by a much younger woman, but not in the normal way. They don't get graphic, but they just tell you in an abbreviated term what is happening to this man from this 20-something-year-old woman. And it's not very masculine, in my opinion.
Equipment was involved.
Equipment was involved, and he was on the receiving end of it, to put it politely.
Right.
And then that throws into a whole bunch of other stuff, which I was hoping the script would address a bit more in the moment and less later on after the fact. Because essentially, Patricia gets really distraught by seeing this, as any normal woman would. And as she tries to make her escape, so to speak, not like she has to really run from anything, but she, aside from her feelings and emotions, she gets hit by a cab and then wakes up in the hospital to her college friends, who are not her Upper East Side friends, all around her, so happy that she's alive. And we start getting some exposition dumps about these friends. Like one of them, she's a single mother whose husband died during the tragic events of 9/11. And And Patricia, we find out, has been her best friend and has taken care of her and helped her through that grieving process. And she's now this very brainy, very tech savvy, medical savvy, legal savvy, woman who's raising a son. And we learn that she's hasn't been with another man since her husband died in the last, which would be 20 odd years or so.
Right.
And so she's very pent
22
up.
years is what she said. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was done very tactfully too. Like it wasn't trying to lean into a sob story. It was some part matter of fact, but also a little bit empathetic.
Right.
And I've seen many other writers do that where they kind of just really draw it out. And really try to build up that save the cat type of moment, or that past save the cat type of moment. And but it was a very, for this type of scene, which is the convalescing for Patricia, it was still very chaotic because you have all of these voices bickering with each other around this woman who is kind of coming out of anesthetics or just coming to from this event.
Right.
What was your take on that part of the scene?
Well, going back just a little bit, and
Sure.
maybe it was my understanding it differently. When she went to go find her husband, the original scene with those erudite ladies seemed like she went to find her husband because they had put in her mind a little bit of doubt about what he was actually doing. Oh, he's out working on a Friday? Instead of going to go surprise him in a kind way, to me it seemed like she was halfway expecting that her friends were going to be right. Now, that was just my interpretation.
Well,
now with the
I'd only say that because she brought wine, and then as soon as she saw that, she dropped the bottle and then freaked out. I think that she was probably vacillating between the two options, but hoping that it was the former and not the one that she saw.
Right. No, I have to agree with you. When it came to the hospital scene, I completely agree with you. And I don't see people waiting for someone who's been in a coma having all four of them there at the time she snaps out of it. But then again, this is supposed to be a comedy, so I can't give too much of a hard time about that. But I started to notice at this point that there's going to be a lot of cliches, which there were. So
they were in droves. There's a lot of cliches, and there's a lot of things trying to butt against the cliche, and the way that they did it is by providing another cliche.
Right.
Yeah. So we have this scene where we get her basically her college friends and her New York friends all around her, talking about how terrible it is that her husband has cheated on her, even though I would argue the act that we saw would not really make him being the one cheating at this point, which I think is some ambiguity there, and I think they should have clarified that a little bit more. Because again, they tried to do that set piece to make it like a comedic "oh my god" moment, as opposed to a dramatic, tragic one. But I also think that kind of obfuscates the idea that there's legitimate infidelity going on, as opposed to a man exercising a kink where his prostate is being examined in an unorthodox way.
Right. Now, I got a question for you before we get too far, because I know we'll get back to it. But at this point in the script, did you start to notice a lot of familiarity with other movies?
I noticed some familiar tropes. Like I felt like I noticed some things that you'd see in like a Bridesmaids, or other type of female-driven raunchy comedies. Those are kind of picking up stuff that you would see, like from Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion, certain types of dynamics there, stuff a little bit from Coyote Ugly. I saw a couple of those moments there. There's probably more movies I'm just not able to think of, but there was a level of familiarity to it where it's like I recognize these ideas. I can't 100% place them, but I recognize them enough to the point where I've probably seen them, and later throughout the day or week, I'll start making those connections with more detail than I have at the moment. Like, what stuff did you pick up on?
Yeah, no, at this point I was going, okay, this is a retelling. And I have a couple of movies in mind that it's a retelling. And one of them I could say, but it might give away the ending of this script. So it was a movie done in the 80s. And again, I'm not sure if I could say the name of it.
Dirty Little Liars or something?
No. Okay. First Wives Club. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that doesn't give it away, so we're okay.
But that one, I'm just
the
going.
dynamic is absolutely yes.
It was just, to me, it was, I see where this is going, and we're going to have a retelling of a couple other stories. And then this is where I started to get bored. The beginning started up great, and then at this point, I'm going, you know what? I'm getting bored.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, like I wasn't getting bored, but I was just kind of thinking, okay, we're going through the motions, so to speak. Like we after she gets out of the hospital, we kind of do a time jump, and she's with her divorce lawyer, and we're learning that she's pretty much not getting anything from the divorce.
Right.
And they don't establish in that scene that there's a prenup when they really should. Like this is the perfect moment to
Yes.
establish the
Yes.
prenup stuff. We don't get
I
that
was
at
going to
all.
bring that up. Yep.
We're just getting a cliche. Like she's not getting anything. The husband's getting everything. We're like, well, that's kind of the inverse of the cliche.
Yep.
But the way that they address it is a scene or two later. Actually not a scene or two, like 3 scenes later, we learn she signed a prenup that was so meticulous it also prohibited her from gaining 10 extra pounds, and that's supposed to be the punchline to why she is now out without money. Like she still has visitation rights for her kids, but she has no property, she has no money, and she basically has to re-enter the workforce, which she gave up when she got married to this guy initially. And the other part too is like she doesn't feel regretful about being a homemaker and a mother, but she feels upset that because this has happened, some other opportunities have now been robbed from her through hindsight, as opposed to something that was actually bugging her in the moment. Like she was never bothered by the fact that she gave up her career to have a family, which I thought was very fascinating. But she's only bothered about it now because her husband is now leaving her and is taking everything, to the point where she's like, now I kind of regret not doing that, because now that I know this is happening, I could have really used that career to actually not put me in this situation. But it's not something she ever really thought of or considered. It's actually a very believable type of situation for her, which I was actually like, okay, I'm kind of empathetic for it, because she's not saying I wish I'd never had my kids, or I wish I never got married to this guy, or anything like that way. She's just saying, I spent my life doing the things I loved for the family I loved, and now that's being taken away from me, and what do I have left?
Yeah, and to me that was completely believable.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen thousands of people in my career over the years, and I've had hundreds of families that I've seen that were broken. And for the wife, the mother, that actually is fairly common. I would say about 80-90% of the time, where they decide, you know what, I am going to be the homemaker or co-homemaker, or however the arrangement is. And the thought in the back of their mind really isn't there that, you know what, I had opportunities that I let go, because they were assuming that this was going to be a lifetime commitment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that uncommon, so that fit, that made sense.
Yeah, and it was something that I thought was really, genuine. Um, because again, it wasn't type of preaching like a current day feminist agenda or anything of that nature. It was
Right.
just like, these are the circumstances. This is the life she has. She's still a good mom. Like you see how she's interacting with her kids, and how she's
Yep.
supervising her eldest daughter, and you're like, she has a very rewarding life, and now she's thrown in this situation that her friends were telling her she should have expected, but she didn't think so, because she thought she was doing everything right. And that it's just, the circumstances at hand, and they're not contrived. They're plausible, especially given the amount of money that she has access to, and her husband has coming in.
Right.
Certain privileges enable certain unethical behavior, and now we find her. She's lost everything, except for her kids, and she might not even have full custody of her kids. Like she's got shared custody, but they're most likely going to be spending all their time living with their father, who has all the money and means to provide for them. So
Right.
we're making that assumption because based on the facts that at hand, and she's fighting for the house in the Hamptons, because she put so much effort into decorating it and maintaining it and making it a home, and the fact that she's not going to have it anymore is really hurting her as well, because there's the subtext is that that's where she could continue to raise the kids, and they'd have a place of familiarity to stay and be at with her, as opposed to all the other properties that the husband has. And so what she ends up managing to do is negotiating, I guess, President's Day weekend. It would be the last,
Yes.
is the last weekend she has there, and then she has to be out. And so she doesn't know what to do at that point. And so she gets drunk, and she winds up on a train to Boston, and she ends up meeting up with her friend who she hasn't seen in 20 years, which is Amy, who is a typical hard-edged single woman alcoholic bar owner or co-owner of points who loves every Boston sports team and has a mouth on her and has an attitude and a cut through the bullcrap mentality. So she's all the things that is the cliche best friend from your hometown that hasn't
From
been
Boston, yeah.
corrupted by the flashiness of the city type of thing.
Yeah, no, you nailed that one. That's exactly the impression I got. Um, there was, I'm going to try and remember now. There was something about her though, her old friend, because you get hints of her at the very beginning. You see them at the beginning, now you see them again after she's been drunk. That's going on,
Mm-hmm.
but it's for me. She seemed at a good half of the time a little unbelievable. It's too
Yeah.
much of the Boston, too much of the hard edge. There's a scene in it, I don't know where exactly it is. I think it's towards the beginning because there's a lot of flashbacks. You're in the police station, you're at the house, you're here or there. But where she's at the police station blowing bubbles, like
Chewing gum.
your
Yeah.
typical, yeah, yeah, with the chewing gum. And to me that took me out immediately. Uh, you just don't see that nowadays. That was something that they did for Happy Days. This is where the tough kid was. But now it's and have that in an interrogation room, even in Northampton. I don't think the police would have been too kindly to having someone chewing bubble gum. But it also painted a light about her that it just didn't seem realistic.
Yeah, I mean, when the flashback, when these girls were 16, they're at a party, they're drinking underage, and they're kind of going through the motions when the police come in to break up the party. Like they know where to hide, they know how to kind of
Yep.
get away from them. They're this is good character development because we're understanding their level of experience, and it was actually one of the rare moments where we get to see something more than get told something. And what ends up happening is that they end up on their way, essentially on their way home, they decide instead of taking, the truck of the guys that they were playing beer pong opposite or quarters opposite, sorry, they decide to take a police car that the police officers have left open with the keys in the ignition, and
Yeah.
that's the level of troublemaker that these two girls were at the time. And now we jump 20 years later to the present day where Patricia is no longer a troublemaker. Amy is a bit more stable, but she still hasn't lost that troublemaker edge. And what we find out with this setup, which is that all of the ladies are being interviewed by the police officer, and the framing is that they're possibly being going under arrest. But this is a part of the mystery of it, and it's not a mystery box. There's actually a conclusion that we won't spoil
Yep.
here, but it's a very I think it's a satisfying conclusion for what it is. But these women are being questioned and interviewed about the events that have happened, and they are having fun with the idea that Amy, the Boston best friend, has has a rap sheet, but not necessarily any convictions, and she's supposed to be comfortable in this situation. And I think the way that they just kind of overdid it made it less believable because
Yes.
the guy actually, there's literally a scene where he pops down a giant file, and Amy assumes that everybody's history. She's like, no, it's just yours. It's like, okay, comedic joke, a little bit too much, I think, in this case here. But I understood the point they're trying to get across. Hyperbole is what you try to strive for in comedies, to make it extra ridiculous for the context. And that's where I think the tone was a little bit off, because even though this is kind of framed like it's supposed to be a comedy, I didn't find myself laughing at all reading the script. There was nothing really funny going on, at
Right.
least not for me to grasp. Maybe from a female's perspective it was funny, but there was a lot more. There wasn't really much any wordplay with the characters between them in regards to jokes or making allegories or comparisons. And it had a lot of telling about relationships that I thought would have been better served with showing.
I agree. Especially since it was a short script, their time could have been taken to develop some of that more.
Yeah,
And with the time jumps, like you said, the time jumps and actually showing would have been invaluable to really develop, especially when you have so many different characters.
oh yeah, I mean there's this one scene where all the ideas I thought were really really great, and it's when they're on the beach and Patricia is having second thoughts about the divorce party and maybe trying to find a way to get back with her ex-husband, and Amy is recounting with her the story of when Patricia's father was ill and passing away. And Patricia went back home to see him and help take care of him, and Amy was helping to take care of him too. And she invited Amy back to New York and didn't pick her up at the train station. And Amy got kind of heartbroken by that and went
Right.
back to Boston, and they hadn't spoken since. And I'm sitting there, I'm reading the pages, and I'm thinking, this should be shown. This should be a
Yes.
part of the flashbacks or something about happening in the first act of the film that we as an audience can see is hanging over these two characters up until this point, as opposed to it essentially coming out of nowhere. And
See,
while the actors are talking, while the actors are kind of having the subtext of it back and forth through the first half of that script, it's subtext that we as an audience are not aware of. And when we're revealed it, it's like this is kind of coming too little, too late. Sorry to
I
cut
think
you off there.
when no, 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 your show. I'm just grateful to be here, but I think that would have been the best time for that would have been when Patricia goes to the bar and sees Amy before she meets her again. The flashback would come into her mind, would play out the scene why she's hesitant to see Amy again.
Hmm.
That would have been the perfect place to put that scene.
Yeah, it really would have. It would have also reinforced reasons like she didn't have any family to come back to aside from Amy, and maybe that wasn't enough, or maybe that reminded her of some heartbreak, and that's why
Yes.
she kept her distance. Give us something that she could use for her reason to do there. It doesn't have to be a good reason from our perspective. It just has to be a good enough reason from her perspective to facilitate conflict between her and Amy, because that's kind of what you want to have here. Amy, on the other hand, as soon as she meets her, she's like, a little bit of trash talk, but okay, they're all friends again, and she's going to help them, and they're going to work things out. And I don't know. I rarely see those types of instances in real life between women. Like my sister has had some pretty nasty friend falling outs before that I had to.
Women don't forget.
Yeah, some women don't forget. Some plot and have grudges, and some just like to abandon altogether. I do see that in some of my male friends, but unfortunately, I've witnessed it far more consistently through my sister than I have anyone else. So I was kind of wondering, like, when is the ball going to drop, where Amy really just lets Patricia have it, and the closest we got was that scene where she's just recounting that event and that happened when 20 years prior, and I'm like, that's a good idea, but it's coming too late, and it would have been heavier
Yes.
if we saw that earlier. Because if she brought it up, she wouldn't have to recount it again. They could get right into the tail end of that scene, which is a little bit better, where Patricia's like, I just didn't know what to do, and I don't have a reason. I don't know why it didn't happen, and Amy could be run with that a little bit more. But it was a really interesting dynamic between the relationship of these two girls, kind of rebuilding their friendship in their 40s, essentially, at a pivotal moment in their time. My question for you, because this is something I had not too much difficulty imagining, but just trying to see if there was actually any comedy in it, which is one of the characters, I believe it was Blair, planned out a massive amount of games called, gosh, let me see if I can find it up here. But she had a massive amount of like party
Patricia's
games.
assets.
Yeah, and just tons of party games for them to do. So there's like Never Have I Ever. There is a whole bunch of like what are like the effects, Patricia's personal effects that she takes with her, her assets or something of that nature.
Yeah.
Like what is going on here? Like, do these games feel like believable? Especially because here's another thing that men will definitely appreciate. There's a great deal of female nudity described in this script. Women are definitely, getting drunk and taking their clothes off.
Right. Right. Um, It didn't. I got a little bit without giving away the end. It some of it made uh, tied things together when we get to the conclusion of the story of why certain games were being played. But for the most part, it seemed it was again I was bored at this point and it seemed really ridiculous. It didn't start roping me back in until they left the house and left the party.
Right, to
The
go to the
rest of it
bar.
just
Hmm.
yeah, the rest of it just seemed kind of uh, seen it before. I mean, not the nudity and stuff, but the party situation. Uh, it just was done before, and again, it was. I was having a hard time staying entertained at all. It was just again boring. So the the games were. It didn't help. They could have been better provided. They could have she could have set the scene better, but it didn't do a lot for me. Except, like I said, and you know why. Some of the game party favors, different things were applicable later on to the conclusion, but during this point, it seemed ridiculous, especially how much they drank, the substance abuse. You and I were talking before this, having our genetics where we'd be a little bit more tolerant. But to me, I don't know how they were standing when they got to the bar.
Yeah, yeah, they were drinking a lot. Like all of these types of scenes with regards to the games and the drinking and stuff felt more like we want to have a period of moments where women are just it's more having fun and a little bit of exposition of character than actually exploring conflict and issues and story. It was like, let's go throw a party and just film ourselves having a party. It's like that's
Right.
I don't like those scenes. We've seen them in the Hangovers. We've seen them in like a lot of those
Yep.
college movies. I think the game was called Ex Parte, and it was a play on the
Oh, there you
language
go.
game. Right.
Yep.
Sorry, it just came to me. Um, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of funny, but that might be a little over the heads of your audience demographic that you're targeting here. um, but like it was really just felt like they're doing these types of scenes for the cast and the crew to have fun at work, as opposed to trying to, number one, give some really good gags, because it was all just like general stuff. Like they have a giant phallic looking pinata. They had a lot of like sex toys, alcohol, um, things of that nature.
Yeah, they're even doing lines at one point.
Yeah, they have some drugs, so they're doing lines of drugs. There was a little bit of a joke of it when they bring in the Subway sandwiches, which I'm like, okay, that's a little that has a contrast to everything else that's happening there. But I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I can see how that could probably be presented as a little bit funny. And then we have these moments where they go skinny dipping and they go into the water and it's really cold because again, it's President's Day up in the Hamptons, the water's freezing.
Right.
um, and it's like, okay, I get that. You're doing a little bit of raunchiness and you're trying to get a little bit of edge in there and you're trying to make these women look more human, but at the same time you're trying to push them into like, we know what the male version of these types of parties is. Now let's give you the female version of it, and it doesn't have as much separation as you think it would, and it feels more like they're trying a little harder than actually having fun with the concept. Um,
Trying to relive a bad frat party from when they were
yeah,
younger.
which again, you would see on the male version of this, you would see that they'd be trying to relive a bad frat party, and and I personally would be rolling my eyes just as much
Yep.
as it
Yep.
was during this part here, because I'm like, there's not much contrast. We don't have a single character that is the overly responsible homemaker that thinks we should all cut back a little. Like, I kept saying her name was Blair. Her name was Bonnie. I apologize, people in the chat. Bonnie is the one who lost her husband and who hasn't been with another man since, and who's the big brain. But even then, she is not trying to be the group's consciousness, so to speak. Like, who's the one that's going to be the Debbie Downer, so to speak, that you can actually have conflict with and have fun with, or have two characters butt together. They do have one where I think it's like there's two of the girls there have a romance, a hidden, a forbidden romance. And I think one of
Yep.
them is married, and I was confused on that part. Like again, there's so many characters here. I was actually having difficulty identifying how they related to each other and what those relationships were, and it just made things too complex because again, I think there was like 6 girls. There's the two
Yeah,
there's
there
the two
was.
Julies, Bonnie, Karen, Jacqueline, Amy, Patricia,
And
and
Quan.
Innes, I think. So that's like
Oh
7
yeah.
or 8. That's a lot of people to balance. I mean, I get it for a party. You understand you want a lot of people, but they're maintained throughout the entirety of the second act of the script, and it's like you're having difficulty juggling them all. And then when they decide to go to Patricia's daughter's bedroom and wear her old clothes to look younger and hotter, and then go hit the bar, now we're being introduced to like 4 other guys who are enamored with
Yep.
them. And so now we're looking at like 11 characters to balance, and they're all getting lost in the weeds at this point. And it was like, okay, the writing, I mean, the prose is fine. The descriptions are good. The dialogue works for some of the context that it works. But now you're juggling so many characters, I'm not able to keep heads or tails of who I'm supposed to pay attention to. I'm very fortunate that, Patricia and Amy were so prominent in the first half of that script that I can remember them. But all the other women, it's like I'm having a hard time retaining who they were. And I think you could have combined a lot of them. Like, I think the 2 Julies, why have 2 ones named Julies and you separate them by Silver and Quan? Just make them one. If you, and you have like Innes and Karen, you don't need both of them. Just make that one. And then you got Bonnie. Bonnie was fine. So now you got like 5 women to worry about. Easier to balance, easier to sort through. Giving them both those traits makes them a more rounded character, I think. And I probably have remembered those traits a little more.
100%. Absolutely. Because this was the first out of the scripts that you've given us where I had to go back several times to make sure this one was this one was that, this one was this, and this is why they're doing that. It was way too many. I agree with you. I think if they halved the number of women, and they could have even halved the number of men that they ran into, and it
Yes.
would still work a lot
Like
better.
I don't think you needed. I think it was like 4 guys. You could do it
Yes.
maybe 2 or 3. 3 would be pushing it, but you could pull it off.
Hmm.
And the other part too is like the women. Although I don't think, I mean, Bonnie was probably the closest to the one that was endearing, but there's not enough of her. But the rest of the women were just very obnoxious, and they were trying to be obnoxiously edgy with their verbiage, with what they wanted to do. Um, it just didn't feel. It just didn't feel like they were each individual characters. They're like, okay, this person is, swearing a lot. So that's going to be her thing. And then all of a sudden the other 2 are swearing a lot and then doing, bumps of drugs or what have you. And I'm like, okay, now the lines are blurring between the distinction of these characters. And they're
That's
just doing it
that's
to
a good
just do it.
that's a good point because writing, at least in the way I do things, and hearing you, and I assume you'll agree with this because I think this is what you're saying, is that when you have a character, there should not be any other characters that you can fuse them with.
Right.
They need to be distinct individuals with their own characteristics where something happens to them, you would, if you knew them, if the writing was done properly, you would expect them to react in certain number of ways. And it wouldn't be confused with somebody else where they would make the exact same decision, where they would see something a little bit different, act a little bit different. You would expect to have a different feel to them. Where here, again, half of the women, you could interchange the names and it would still be the same story. Where, like you said, Bonnie, with her crystals and all of that other stuff, she was unique. She is somewhat endearing, but the other ones were just interchangeable pegs.
Yeah. And the one thing that I was like, okay, you're doing this for this character, which is they give Bonnie a little bit of a love story and not a good one. Just, more like,
Right.
I guess
She was
more
used.
appropriate be a lust story. She's
Yes,
one of the
yes.
4 guys that they meet at the bar. She ends up hooking up with, and the guy that she hooks up with essentially kind of responds positively to her, but without spoiling it, there's another agenda going on here, and it's like this kind of comes in a little bit too late, and it's a little bit undercooked, and if there is a joke around this, it didn't land well for me. But the concept, I'm like, the concept is fine. It's just I think it came a little too late.
No, I agree. I agree. There was a lot of the concept that I thought was good, but again, it wasn't until towards the end where the spoilers start to hit where I started being pulled out of my boredom. Uh,
Yeah.
it was one of those things. Again, I can't reiterate this enough. It's been there, done that. I had that through my head over and over again.
No, I mean that's the thing. It's like okay, it's the same but different. Um, Different in the sense that it's a different way of getting to this type of story, this type of familiar plot. Uh, the the conflicts are interesting. One of the things that it does have for it, which I think is a bonus to it, is the fact that once you finish reading the script, you're like, okay, if I reread this again, I'm going to pick up a lot more of what the writer is doing than I did on the first read, and I think that's a good sign because that
Yes,
will
true.
translate over to if this goes into production, that will translate over, and I think people would actually like kind of want to rewatch it and have something to and have fun with it a little bit in that regard. But it does have I would say argue it does have a weak second act. And
Hmm.
and when things do like when we get to the mid-act turning point, when we find out more of what's going on in this divorce party and some stakes start to escalate, then we're like, okay, I see this is the type of plot that's happening. Now, without getting into spoilers, at what point in the script did you kind of realize what the twist was kind of be, or did it point out? Did you catch on to it or beforehand, or did it come at the right time?
Beach scene.
The beach scene, yeah,
When we're at the beach scene, it's like, okay, here's where we are. I know what's happening.
right. So yeah, you saw the subtext of what that argument was and what they're
Oh
actually
yeah.
both of them were
Yep.
trying to achieve. Yeah, I was around that too as well. I was thinking, okay, something is off here when it comes to like the doubt that she has, because we actually have a point which isn't a spoiler, which is that Patricia's daughter calls her with an SOS, and we
Hmm.
find out through her daughter that the mistress, the man that the woman that her ex husband has essentially tried to replace her with, has left, and he's sobbing and he's regretful of leaving Patricia, divorcing her, and he's wondering if there's a way to that they can get back together. And the daughter felt responsible enough to at least inform her mother of this. And so this is where we get all the doubts. Like Patricia might want to stop the divorce party and just not go through with it. And Amy is trying to tell her, like, you have to see this through to the end, because you don't want to go back to him. He's already violated the sanctity of marriage. He didn't, he broke that trust. You shouldn't just acquiesce to that because he made a mistake. And there's subtext about her saying that if he made the mistake once, he'll probably do it again, and you'll be
Yep.
back in the situation, and that's not healthy for you, and that's not healthy for your family. And she's defending herself as her only real best friend. And the astute audience out there is probably understanding what we're coming from here without spoiling it. But
Hmm.
I will say this: once we get to the twist, it is a satisfying twist. It
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
it didn't ruin the story for me at all.
No, when Amy started over aggressively hiding the phone,
Hmm.
that's when the question started hitting. But I figured it out at the beach scene, and then uh, the end was done well. I have to say that that it was that was a satisfying bit. And I had sat down with my wife and I explained things, and I said, this might be, if it was done right, this might something you get a kick out of because of the way it ends. And that's another reason why I brought up that other movie that I did, because the familiarity between that and the combination of another movie, and the name eludes me right now. It seems like this was something that was, well, I'm going to retell these two stories my way.
Right.
But even still, it was, this is kind of cool.
And this is something that we get a lot in screenwriting world, is where some writers they have a seed of an idea, and what they end up doing is, in order to better flesh it out, they'll take one movie that's part of that seed and another movie from the other part of that seed, combine them together to try and create something new.
Right.
And the real challenge is how much new can you inject into this that we haven't seen already. I would say the writer was a little hit and miss on most of the ideas. Some of them hit well, and then a lot of them kind of missed for me. And I think but I think the skill is there, and I think the talent is there with the writer because again, unlike the last week's script, I did not notice any spelling mistakes in those first 40 pages at least. I didn't think I saw a grammar spelling mistake until like the last 10 pages, and it was like one or two, and I was
There
very
was one earlier.
there was
It was on. Yeah, it was about the fourth page that I
oh
picked up, and then at the end, it wasn't a spelling error. It was the wrong word.
okay.
It threw things off. But then, to me, at the end, even though the ending was a reasonable conclusion, I could, at least in my opinion, it seemed like someone who was writing when they were tired,
Yeah.
trying to rush the end out. And then the mistakes started flowing. I go, this was not typical of the rest of the writing of the script.
Okay, so yeah, so you felt like the pacing towards the end of the script was a little rushed, and as a result, it was reflected in the writing. I can totally get on board with that because it does happen. It feels kind of abrupt, and part of
Hmm.
the stuff here is like the stuff that's happening at the beach. That feels like it's tail end second act, early third act, but it's actually right at the mid act turning point.
Hmm.
But the context around it just feels like it's happening later in the story than it actually is, and that comes with what they do in the tail end of the second act and into the third act and climax. So, I think that probably takes us to, the final deciding process. So for you, Adega, before we elaborate a little bit more on this, if you were a Hollywood producer and you read this script, would you greenlight it or would you pass it?
Oh, I'd pass it.
You'd pass it, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it would be one of those ones where I'd say, I want to see it again, but I want to see it just like what we talked about before. Because I think if they had less characters, the stuff that we talked about, it would probably, if they spent 40 million making the movie, I would imagine them making some money off of it. Maybe a little bit less of a budget than that, but that's if it was rewritten. Uh, this is a chick flick that people haven't seen in a while, and with again with some rewrites, some work, I'd say yeah, let's go up. But as is, no, I'd have to pass it.
See, for some of the reasons that you stated is probably why I'd give it a go. I mean, yes, it would need some work, and that comes with the territory. But I think that there's these types of movies when they are made, they are standalone within that production year. Like you don't get like two or three of these types of films a year. You usually
Right.
get one. And I think the market is. I think this script could fit that market. Like I would give it I would give it a green light, just based on the familiarity of it and the fact that we're
Hmm.
dealing with, I mean, a decent relationship between the two main characters. Like Patricia and Amy, I liked their relationship and I liked the journey that they go on, and I think that's probably where the foundation of the story is. And if I were to greenlight this, I'd be like, I want to work more on that. I'd want to cut back some of the characters, but overall, I think the plot of this story would resonate with the audience that this demographic that is targeted towards. I think they would dig it. I think they would be happy with it. I think that it's a testament to the writer who has a concept that would be rife for certain agendas, and they
Oh
don't
yeah,
go that way. And
yeah.
that already is like a bonus in my book. It's like, oh, this person cares more about writing the characters and having fun with the story than preaching or putting a message in the same way that you put the cart before the horse. And I
Okay.
would be
Well,
like,
maybe that's my ignorance of the trade because
mm-hmm,
um,
okay,
having the idea that you can work with the writer to correct what's wrong with it before you reject it, well, that makes sense. Because if that was the case and just what you were saying, I'd say, yeah, we're going to make some money off of this. But as is, I would say no. So I understand where you're coming from. And if with that stipulation, then I may have to agree with you.
okay, cool. Because again, I would say it rated pretty high on the blacklist. Again, 25 producers thought this was a good enough script, and I can see where they're coming from there. I actually can really see where you're coming from because again, it's not up to your standards. Ooh, excuse me. Which and to a certain point, it's not really 100% up to mine. But I see a lot of potential in this script
Yeah.
to actually be a low budget successful film, and that's where I'm coming at it from here, because I mean it wasn't in the sense of Madden where it just felt like it was, even though it was well written, it was just kind of all over the place. It didn't have much focus going on it. And then last week's script, it was also without much focus at all. Like, this script had a lot of focus, and
Hmm.
even though it had a little bit too many characters, at least on the supporting side of things, I was never confused with the main characters. And when I got to that ending and saw what that twist was and how it paid off, I actually really appreciated it, because the writer did the legwork. Because when I went back to read it with that new context in mind, I'm seeing another level to the story, and I'm thinking this is what you need in Hollywood. This is what you need in movies, is you need people to want to go back and see the thing again. And if you can execute that well in a movie script and then translate that well to film, you've basically guaranteed your men and your women who like this movie to definitely see it a second time.
Yeah.
And, and,
Well,
and I
yeah,
think that
right.
was my strategy that was going on for me.
Exactly as it is. If they were careful with camera work and used innuendo, it would be a huge hit on Hallmark. If you wanted it to be good in Hollywood, yeah, it would need some fixing. But like you said, with a little bit of fixing, it would do well. It would do well.
Yeah. So that's I mean, those are my thoughts for now. Do you have any other questions, Adega, that you want to
Oh,
pitch?
I'm just getting a kick out of learning how this works because, with the first two scripts, like I liked the Madden one, but I knew the history was wrong,
Hmm.
and I would have passed it, but um, if I knew the history, but I don't know how the industry works. I'm learning, and learning that you can actually sit down with the writer and not just reject it outright and say, "Hey, we fixed this and we'll go with it." Then I'm getting it. I'm just getting a huge kick out of this. Um, but no, I think, seeing the success of Barbie, that was a chick flick, and we haven't had too many real good chick flicks.
Hmm.
We've had some dramas and various things, but something like this, if it was to come out and it was cleaned up, um, yeah, it would do really well. And I just, thanks for giving me the opportunity to read through it and to do this with you, because this is funner than heck.
Oh, I mean, this is the stuff that I like, because I like getting everyone's perspective on the screenplay and how it works out. And remember, guys, if you sign up to Patreon, you know what script you're going to be reading, and again, also comment on the posts as well, because we will read them here on the show and address them. And if you have questions, please get them in via Super Chat, because that goes to support the show. It allows us to keep the software continuing to run as well. But aside from that, it's really just trying to see, okay, I've read this script. It got 25 votes. I don't think those producers are out of their mind when it came to selecting that they would go through this script, where I'm more judgmental to the previous two screenplays that we
Hmm.
read. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, we actually have a legitimate comedy, or at least a legitimate attempt at a comedy. I would say it
Hmm.
needs jokes. I understand the framing. Maybe some of the stuff that was written visually would translate better as a comedy, as a comics bit or skit on film than it does on the page. I will let that be open to the director and the producer at hand. It just didn't work for me on that regard. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, if I'm seeing the potential to this, and those 25 others are seeing the potential to this, then those 25 producers are probably um, are thinking more about the actual content and what that script can do with an audience, as opposed to anything else. And I'm like, that's kind of a good sign. It shows that even in peak 2021, when all our craziness was happening, there were probably some people there that were actually not thinking or towing the company line that we were seeing at that moment. And I think there's something to say about that, because that's one of the aspects of this show is we're evaluating these scripts by ourselves, and we're also evaluating the people that supported these scripts. And if they're in the right headspace, we're going to see a great script that kind of hits everybody. Everybody's going to kind of like and be like, yes, this should be made into a movie. And if we see something that's absolutely terrible and it rates high, we can be like, well, what were they thinking?
Right, right.
And it's like, is the industry all going this way? And if it is, wow, we're doomed. But we're getting a nice little back and forth here. We have like this script had received the highest number of votes out of the 3 scripts that we've read so far. And granted, it's
That
from a
was
different
something.
year, but
Yeah. No, that was just something that I noticed, and the way things are nowadays, you anticipate things to be a certain way. You anticipate certain agenda or political or various things to be presented in the story. And I thought for the life of me, this story was going to hit hard on it, and it never did. And, you had your good, you had your bad, you had your good people, you had your bad people, you had your different motivations. And at the end of the day, I was thinking, okay, we're almost balanced here. Not bad, not bad.
yeah.
So having the producers or whoever the ones who are reading this stuff saying, "Hey, this ain't bad," it's like you said, there is a lot of hope out there that we're gonna get some good stuff soon.
I mean, you got to cross your fingers to that because again, like nothing is guaranteed. But
Right.
I mean, if this is I mean, we have this one female writer who has put forth a script that's trying to be judged on its own merits as opposed to any type of ideology. And right off the bat, I think, whether I'd pass or greenlight this script, right off the bat, I'm thinking that is a point in my book. Like this is a
Hmm.
writer I'll pay attention to, and they themselves now have to screw up for me to not like their work anymore at this point. Cause I was like that requires some discipline. Especially in a climate at that time where this was kind of like encouraged. And because this writer decided to say, no, I don't need to do that, I'm going to give you a story that's got some derivative points to it. It's going to have a veneer of one genre when it's actually another, but I'm still going to try to write the heck out of it to make you entertained. And I say that she achieved that for the first act and for the third act, but the second act has its problems, and that's kind of par for the course in a lot of scripts, unfortunately. But it's not, for me, at least from my take, it wasn't enough to kill the potential of the script for me.
You bring up another good point too. Coming from the book aspect, the publishing instead of the cinema, I see an awful lot of where things are greenlit for the obvious reasons that we've learned to really hate. And seeing a writer do this without following those tropes or those pitfalls, I think in some regards, she was probably playing the line of I have to put in just enough so I can get recognized. Because in most of the book sales now, if you don't put in a lot of these odds and ends, you're not even going to get looked at. So I could see that, at least in my mind, I think she was playing the line as most as she could, one way or the other, so that she didn't and cause animosity between either one side or the other right off the jump. And I'm with you. I think she did a real good job of keeping things in check one way or the other.
Yeah, and I'll just put it to you this way. So the writer is Rebecca Webb, and if she ever does come across this podcast, I want to congratulate her on writing a script that I think has some great potential, and with a little bit of adjustments could really be something that I think audiences for this year or next year or the year after, could really enjoy. I mean,
Right.
you said you noticed some familiarity with the First Wives Club. I concur
Hmm.
with that, and that movie was well received, and I think it's objectively a pretty solid movie. And I
Hmm.
don't see why this one couldn't be some type of like this generation's version of that. And I think there's something. I think that's a positive sign to have out there. So I would keep an eye out for her, and hopefully I get to read some more of her scripts in the future, and they have an increased level of quality and satisfaction to them, and ideally don't go in the direction that has hurt certain other studios over the last few
Right.
years.
Right.
All right, so I think that's it for us because it was a short script, so it's a slightly shorter show. But I want to thank you, Adega, for coming out. Is there any final thoughts you want to share before we call it a day?
No, I really appreciate this, and it's something, and this is for people paying attention whether now or later. I have an opportunity to talk with you a couple times now, and I want everyone to realize what a gem it is to have someone of your caliber presenting a program like this, let alone your insights. And please support this and share this because I want it to continue for selfish reasons. Script is doing great work for us. We're getting insights into things that we wouldn't have otherwise. And no, just thank you very much.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, the caliber compliment was nice. I don't know if I'm really up to that up to that measure,
I
but I'm
wouldn't have
gonna
said it
try.
if I didn't mean it. I wouldn't
Uh,
have said it if I didn't mean it.
I really appreciate that. So, well, that's one thing I want to do. Again, guys out there, um, I have this show is planned through the end of the year, so there's always going to be a script to read every Saturday. So, I'm going to, keep doing the show as long as I can for you all. As I mentioned before, I know it sounds a little bit like e-begging. I'm not trying to e-beg. You are welcome to support. You don't have to. You're watching the show as support as well. But if you want to get a bit more insight and context, and if you want to read the scripts are available. It requires a little bit of elbow grease, but if you want, you can DM me on Twitter. You can email me. You can follow my Patreon. And as so long as you're not, sharing the script out, willy nilly or spoiling it for other people out there, you can read the script and participate in this. Please, when you're on the Patreon, leave a comment on the script. We will read it on the show. I know a lot of people are a little apprehensive on that. I've gotten some messages on Patreon where they're not sure what they want to do. Trust me, it's fine. You cannot be embarrassed when we address that. But I want to thank everyone out there in the chat for watching, anyone that's listening here on YouTube or on Patreon or on Spotify, because we do have it on Spotify as well. Thanks for letting us entertain you with this and giving you a little bit of insight into some screenplays that are circulating Hollywood from writers who are trying to get these stories made. And I can't wait to see how this show continues, and I can't wait to get more of your feedback out there from all of you. So with that, I want to thank you again for sticking with us for our third episode. And never forget, guys, when it comes to great story, it all starts with the script.